makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
Ladies and gents, I am back, and I'm not gonna give apologies on why I have not made videos in over a month now, maybe like 2 or more months. Let's just say that life has gotten in the way, work has gotten in the way, and I know this is gonna sound like a flimsy excuse being in London, but it's actually been really, really, really hot. And the only times that I've had time to do videos, my room has been just a furnace. So just don't feel like doing videos and like sweating on camera after 5 minutes. So anyway, now that it's cooled down a bit, I can finally uh, feel a good, conducive environment for making videos. So let's do one on one of my not so favorite people in the world. That is Roger Waters, the member of Pink Floyd. Gotta confess, I'm not a huge Pink Floyd fan, so it doesn't really break my heart to talk trash about Roger Waters. And if you know enough about Roger Waters, you know that he is kind of a hero to the anti-war left, which, despite being a leftist, I really despise now. Ever since the war in Ukraine, these people have basically just been spouting Putin's propaganda for free, making utter fools of themselves, and just basically showing that these people, I mean, I think at this point, a lot of them are, to quote the offset meme, ontologically evil. And I say this because their support for people like Putin, as it was in the past for people like Assad, is, contributing to basically supporting the most murderous regimes in the world. And we can be uh, focused on ending Western imperialism, which I would hands down agree is the worst kind of imperialism because it's omnipresent. But that doesn't mean that we need to whitewash all other forms of imperialism, all other forms of genocide, all other forms of aggression that in certain parts of the world are worse than what the West does. And I think if you ask anyone from a country that has been a neighbor of Russia for the past 200 or 300 years, whether they think Russian imperialism is indeed worse than, or rather, whether they think Western imperialism is worse than Russian imperialism. And they'll tell you no. And if you think that's not the case, well, you're an idiot. And actually, you're not really respecting what those people uh, rightfully think. So anyway, what has Roger Waters done, aside from, again, shilling for Putin for the past couple of months? Well, he wrote on his Facebook an open letter to uh, a certain Ukrainian leader. But wait, actually, no, he didn't. It's not actually a famous Ukrainian leader. It's actually his wife. He wrote a letter to Miss Olena Zelenska, the wife of President Zelensky. For starters, what an absolute spineless cuck to write a letter to someone who isn't really driving policy. She's not the commander in chief. She's not the president of Ukraine. She's the first lady. So there's no reason whatsoever to send her this open letter. It is absolutely deranged that he thinks that she is the most indicated person to send this letter to. But let's read it and laugh at how cringe it is. I think it's titled, Did You Exchange a Walk-on Part in the War for a Lead Role in a Cage? What does this even mean? An open letter. Dear Miss Zelenska, my heart bleeds for you and all the Ukrainian and Russian families devastated by the terrible war in Ukraine. So he starts off immediately with both sidesing it. Poor Russian families, they are suffering because so many of their cities are being not destroyed. Because that's the truth. The cities that are being destroyed are in Ukraine, not in Russia. The soldiers who are fighting in Ukraine, on the Russian side, are, in theory at least, not conscripts. So they knew what they were getting into. Now, yeah, there are a lot of conscripts or people who have been coerced in some way or another. That is bad. I think it's it's a tragedy that young people die in war against their will. But there's one country that could avoid this, and it's Russia. It's not Ukraine. The truth is, the only country that has the ability to end this war for both sides is Russia, not Ukraine. Ukraine gives up, if Ukraine decides it doesn't want to fight, that's the end of Ukraine as a nation and as a people. Because the Russian project, very explicit from what Putin and everyone else around him says, has stated, is basically the disappearance of Ukraine as a sovereign entity and as a cultural entity distinct from Russia. That is the project. That is complete cultural extermination, the cultural genocide of Ukraine. That is the Russian war aim. So it's not up to Ukraine to end this war. It's up to Russia to end this war. And by both siding it, he is being just a complete delusional idiot. I'm in Kansas City. Yeah, of course you are. You're a guy. You're a millionaire. You have no skin in this game. I have just read a piece on BBC, apparently taken from an interview you have already recorded for a program called Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, which is to be yada yada yada. BBC quotes you as saying, if support for Ukraine is strong, the crisis will be shorter. I guess that might depend on what you mean by support for Ukraine. If by support for Ukraine you mean the West continuing to supply arms to the Kiev government's armies, I feel you may be tragically mistaken. Throwing fuel in the form of armaments into a firefight has never worked to shorten a war in the past, and it won't work now because, in this case, most of the fuel is being thrown into the fire from Washington, D.C., which is at a relatively safe distance from the conflagration, and B, because the fuel throwers have already declared an interest in the war going on for as long as possible. So this is the classic anti-war leftist. This war is just being used to finance Raytheon and Lockheed, okay? Guess what? So was World War II, okay? Go look up how many contracts Lockheed and Raytheon and Boeing and every single other arms manufacturers got during World War II. But you know what? Had to beat Hitler somehow, okay? There had to be a way. And, unfortunately, I would rather Raytheon or Lockheed not get more contracts for weaponry to Ukraine. But the fact is, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. The only way that you will get a peace that will be acceptable to the Ukrainian people is if Ukraine wins this war. That's the only way. And you know what? They are achieving it. So remember how these dipshits at the beginning of the war were like, no. If the West gives weapons to Ukraine, Russia's going to use nukes. And it's been 6 months. That doesn't happen. I mean, Russia's armies have been basically worn down, corroded into a shadow of their former self. And all of this has been thanks to all those weapons that have been provided to the Ukrainian army, because otherwise they would have folded by now. That's the reality of the situation. I mean, I think they would have resisted far more than the 3 days that Russia had planned to take over the country. But I don't think Ukraine would have survived 6 months without Western assistance. So the very fact that Ukraine is in the game 6 months later, and not only in the game, but at least in the last 48 hours, has inflicted some serious pain on the Russian army. If you've been following 2 separate strategic offensives that are taking place around Kherson and around Kharkiv, and they're doing fine. The reports are still kind of feeding in through various Twitter accounts that I follow, and it's looking really bad for the Russians right now. Really bad. And all of this is because Ukraine is being armed by the West. And the point here is not to shorten the war. That is not the objective. I want to make this absolutely clear. The war will go on as long as it has to, until Ukraine is in a position to obtain a peace treaty that is acceptable to it. And by acceptable to it, I mean acceptable to its people and acceptable to its government. And it's clear for them that that is their aim. And it's clear to me that the government and the people is willing to fight as long as it has to and endure the hardship that it needs to endure. And if this means the war dragging on throughout winter and not being resolved until next year, so be it. That is their choice. And the West, by helping them, will ultimately end up helping them negotiate an acceptable peace treaty. So this is not an issue of shortening the war. I wanted to make it very, very clear. Where were we? I fear that we, and by we I mean people like you and me who actually want peace in Ukraine. He doesn't want peace. He wants Russia to win. He wants Ukraine to surrender because he has this anti-war leftist campist mentality that any Russian victory is a zero-sum game in which it will make the West weaker, and that is good for the world. That's how these people think. They're full of shit, but that's how they think. And that's not what's going to happen. I mean, this war has already made NATO stronger. It's added 2 more countries to the alliance, Sweden and Finland. It's made almost every country pledge to ramp up defense spending. So NATO is going to end up stronger than Russia. Russia, on the other hand, it is true that sanctions have not affected it as much as I think the West would have wished it did. But Russia is going to have its armed forces just thoroughly hollowed out after this war. I mean, it's going to take a long time for them to really recover, especially because some of its elite troops have been decimated. You know, Spetsnaz, VDV. You know, they've taken a hammering. They've lost a lot of their best equipment in terms of tanks, APCs, etc. I mean, they're putting out, you know, hunks of junk from the warehouses. You know, Russia will not run out of tanks or vehicles anytime soon, but the condition of a lot of those tanks that they have in reserve is pretty crap. So they've lost a lot of their prime material. So yeah, that is, you know, that is the situation. And Russia will end up, regardless of the outcome, if the war ended today, with the status quo on the ground today, Russia is still weaker than it was at the beginning of the war. Added to the fact that it's been geopolitically, diplomatically isolated as well, as long as Putin lives. Anyway, yeah, we don't want the outcome to be that you have to fight to the last Ukrainian life. Well, who is we? Like, in what position is this dumbass millionaire who lives in probably a mansion somewhere in England or LA or whatever, who is currently writing this from Kansas City? What is, with what authority does he say that fighting to the last Ukrainian life is a bad thing? That is for Ukrainians to decide. If Ukraine wants to fight to the last man, that's their choice. He has no say in this. I have no say in this. If we instead wish to achieve a different outcome, we may have to seek a different route, and that route may lie in your husband's previously stated good intentions. Again, I find it very weird that this is addressed to the First Lady and not to Zelensky. Anyway, he references the platform that Zelensky ran as president, which was to end the civil war. Civil war. Look at the words that he used. Civil war. This isn't a civil war. This is a Russian-sponsored separatist movement supplied by Russia, and in many cases, including some of the key battles in 2014 and 15, with Russian regular troops involved. So this is not a civil war. This is the type of the stereotypical sort of conflict that Russia has been basically undertaking in all its neighbors, which do not basically lockstep with what Moscow says. That's exactly the type of conflict that they do. This very nebulous sort of hybrid warfare type conflict. That is what they've been doing. So this isn't a civil war, okay? Being peace to the Donbass and partial autonomy to Donetsk and Luhansk. Well, this was something that Zelensky was promoting, and so why is this not acceptable to Russia? Why is this not acceptable to the separatists? You know, give them some sort of quasi-autonomy. There wouldn't have been a war if this had been acceptable to the other side. Ratify and implement the rest of the body of the Minsk II agreements. I don't think Waters even knows what the Minsk II agreements are because they're very long, they're very convoluted, and they basically I don't think that they were like a proper framework for a long-term solution for this. Anyway, one can only assume that your husband's electoral policies didn't sit well with certain political factions in Kiev. Why is he using Kiev? He's still using the Russian spelling. That should tell you everything you want to know. Everything that you want to know. That he's still using the Russian spelling for this. And not once, but twice, because he says it as well up here. So he writes Kiev twice. That to me is, I mean, just complete lack of respect for it. There's no way that at this point he isn't aware that that is not the Ukrainian spelling. So what a piece of shit. What an absolute piece of shit. Yeah. Certain political factions, and those factions persuaded your husband to diametrically change course, ignoring the people's mandate. The people's mandate is to keep fighting. That's the mandate. The moment that they stop fighting, the moment that Zelensky negotiates a peace treaty that is not that is felt as a capitulation, he is out. I guarantee you this. He is out. Sadly, your old man agreed to those totalitarian anti-democratic dismissals of the will of the Ukrainian people, and the forces of extreme nationalism that have lurked malevolent in the shadows have since then ruled the Ukraine. Oh God, this is the Ukraine is run by neo-Nazis argument. Every single army unit is the Azov battalion, and they control everything. This is so ridiculous. So ridiculous. They have also, since then, crossed a number of red lines that have been set out quite early over a number of years by your neighbors, the Russian Federation. And in consequence, they, the extreme nationalists, have set your country on the path to this disastrous war. So he's blaming Ukraine for the war. That's what he's doing. He's blaming Ukraine for the war. And painting Russia as like innocent neighbors. God almighty. This man is deranged. Like, honestly, what I said at the beginning, there are segments of the anti-war left, or anti-imperialist left, that are ontologically evil, and he is one of them. This is not an issue of like, oh, maybe he's wrong, but his heart is in the right place because he supports Palestine. No, it doesn't matter anymore. You can't, like, you cannot say that you are a man with any sort of moral fiber, regardless of your position on Palestine, when you are basically supporting this kind of war, and you are basically using the exact same language and the exact same propaganda that Putin is using in a war of aggression, a war of cultural genocide. It's not just a war of aggression, it's a war of cultural genocide and annexation. That's what it is, and he is whitewashing it, and that makes him evil. I won't go on. Yeah, of course you won't. If I'm wrong, please help me to understand how. Well, maybe he'll watch this video one day. Maybe he won't. If I'm not wrong, please help me in my honest endeavors. There's not honest. There's nothing honest about this. To persuade our leaders to stop the slaughter which serves only the interests of the ruling classes and extreme nationalists both here and in the West and in your beautiful country at the expense of the rest of us ordinary people, both here in the West. Well, again, what is his skin in the game? He's not being affected by any of this. Why is he feeling like there is some loss to him, some material loss to him by the war in Ukraine? I mean, unless he's complaining about energy prices, which I would find it very strange that a millionaire cannot afford that. In Ukraine, in fact, ordinary people everywhere, all over the world. This is also another very common and very bullshitty rhetoric that the anti-war left always uses, which is, what's the name? No war but class war. All war is like just filling the pockets of the plutocrats and yada yada. And I would say most wars are. I mean, there's certainly a component of most wars that definitely obeys I mean, certainly the Iraq War is an obvious one in which there was a massive economic component in the motivations of why the US did it, right? But here, there isn't. I mean, at least on the Ukrainian side. Now, you would argue that, well, for the US, it's very convenient because now it has all these, new arms sales. It's going to raise military spending. It's going to send weapons to its allies as well. And that is true. I mean, the Ukraine war is triggering a massive, massive rearmament in almost every NATO country. I mean, Germany, for example, which has been probably the best example of a former, I would say nearly, when the Cold War ended, the German armed forces were pretty formidable, especially the army. It was a huge, huge army. And few countries have seen its army just wither away the way the Germans have over the past 30 years or so. I mean, we're talking about an army that had almost 10,000 tanks by the end of the Cold War, or actually right after unification, because it added all the tanks from the East German side. It had like 1 million plus reserves, so this was like 1 million plus man army, and now they have something like 300 tanks and something like 60,000 troops. So yeah, Germany will be rearming itself. Poland is now going to pledge to spend something like 5% of GDP on defense, which is huge. Remember, the NATO baseline is 2, and very few countries in NATO actually hit or exceed the 2%. So this is massive. So yeah, there is, and will private companies benefit? Will Lockheed, General Dynamics, Raytheon, all these companies benefit? Yeah, of course they will. So maybe Russia should not have invaded Ukraine to not give an excuse for the US to funnel in so much more money into its military. But that wasn't the gamble. The gamble was that they would conquer Ukraine. I mean, the Russian gamble was basically that they were going to invade Ukraine, capture Kyiv in 3 days, war over, West would accept the new status quo and not do anything, because that's exactly what the West did in all the other acts of aggression that Russia had done. Whether it was Chechnya, whether it was Georgia, whether it's Syria, that was what the West did. And Russia was counting on them doing it again. Didn't work out. And now people like Waters are realizing that actually the West, relative to Russia, is getting stronger. And he doesn't like that because it doesn't fit into the campus mentality that almost the entirety of the anti-war left movement has. For those who don't know, by the way, what the term campism means, because maybe you haven't heard of it, the term campism basically refers to people who see the world as basically 2 camps, the West and the non-West. And basically, the conflict between them is a zero-sum game. So whenever the non-West wins something, the West loses. So they root for every despot and autocrat that is anti-West, just because they think that will make their camp, the anti-US camp, stronger. And they assume that somehow a victory for people like Assad or victory for people like Putin somehow benefits like the rest of the world. Like, does Mexico or Brazil benefit if Putin or Assad wins? No, they don't. So this is ridiculous. And I really wish, and I've known this because I have engaged with the anti-war left for a long, like since the Iraq War. And the fact that the left has been right on issues like Israel-Palestine, because obviously, the aggressor in that conflict is Israel. Obviously, the aggressor in the Iraq War was the U.S. But this is the what's it called? The low-hanging fruit. It's really easy to just say that, yeah, the U.S. was the aggressor in Iraq. But then something in their brain just goes mush when it comes to using that same logic and using the exact same arguments when it comes to criticizing non-West governments that do horrible things. And in their mind, they don't do them. In their mind, anything that an anti-Western government does is good because it makes the West weaker. And that's the campus mentality that I seriously wish, if anyone is watching this, please, please stop it. Please use your brain. Please. People are getting brutally massacred because of the things that these governments do, the things that these autocrats do. They stand for nothing that any sensible leftist would stand for. They are right-wing regimes, the most horrific right-wing regimes that take policies to their own people that no leftist would accept a Western government doing to its own. And yet you give them their blind support. So, and Roger Waters has been a part of this because he is one of the world's biggest celebrities who is incredibly political and incredibly vocal about everything that has to do with war, foreign policy, imperialism. But he is full of shit. And I don't care how many times he takes a Palestinian flag on stage. The fact that he writes shit like this really tells you all you need to know about this man's complete moral emptiness that he has. Complete moral emptiness. So, and like I said, what a fucking cuck to send this to Zelensky's wife and not to Zelensky himself. I mean, does he think that it's like, oh wow, I'm getting an open letter by a famous rock star? No one gives a shit. No one gives a shit. Anyway, on that note, yeah, please tell me what you think in the comments. And once again, I apologize for my absence. I hope I will be making videos on a more regular basis, but I keep promising this and not doing. But now that the temperature has gone down a bit, it's a much better environment. And yeah, I have a few surprises, by the way. I'm not going to say stuff, but stay tuned. Stay tuned. And thanks for watching. For those of you who have remained subscribers since before my little absence, thanks for sticking around. I hope you still get the notifications, and if you don't, there's a notification button. And for those who just found this video, please like, please share, please subscribe, most importantly. And let's try and get this channel to 1,000 as soon as we can. I think I really want to hit 1,000. So I'll do everything I can to get to 1,000. Hopefully before the end of the year. We'll see. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.